Hello, everybody. So today is Wednesday, April 24th, and we are bringing you Block Digest number 173 at block height 573,043. What is Kraken?
What is up, everyone? Yeah, it is Wednesday. We're back at it. All right, just getting used to this week on schedule, man. I've been busy running through this past week doing a bunch of stuff. I know that that's not just me. How you guys been doing? Nopar, I know you've been racking it out this past week. How you doing today?
Yeah, it turns out the last Wasabi release yesterday has been a catastrophe because a feature get into Wasabi, which turns out to be a sexist feature. So I'm trying to mitigate the problems with that right now.
No. If you change that fucking name, I will disown you. I will wage eternal war against Wasabi.
Look, it is a democracy, right? Wasabi is a democracy. So I put out a Twitter poll to change the name or not. But of course, I cannot let just anyone vote. I only let the right people to vote. So there are 4 options: spaces and rename it, spaces and don't touch it, tabs and rename it, tabs and don't touch it. So only the people who are voting with tabs, their votes counting, and the people who are voting with spaces, their votes are actually counting negatively. So it's not my decision because, of course,
if you do this, you're dead to me.
You know, the holy words are spaces versus tabs of how do you indent your code. And of course, tabs are right, spaces are wrong. But I didn't write it in the tweet, so they don't know yet. Only the digest audience knows it.
You're dead to me.
I think you should, because some people are suggesting you should rename it to Lurking Spouse Mode, but I think it should be named Anti-Spouseware.
Actually, I was thinking of, if it really comes to renaming, then it's gonna be Lurking Ninja Mode, because that fits to the theme of the wallet more.
So crazy that you could put out like such an awesome update and everybody's just looking at a word.
You're dead to me if you humor this horse shit. You're dead to me.
All right.
Well, I'm sorry, Shinobi, that's just not recognizing the very large cohort of Bitcoin users who might want to hide it from people. Like, are we assuming that the only women who are using Bitcoin are lesbians?
Yes. There is nobody who will try to steal your Bitcoin except your wife. That's a fact. Own up to it.
So basically the only people that can use Wasabi Wallet are lesbians or heterosexual men, but not gay men, or, you know, women who are not lesbians.
Nope.
Okay, but you know, there is this well-established attack that's called the lurking maid attack, and right, so that's how it come to. And the
see, like, this is it.
But
a maid can be a man.
But that's sexist too. You will get people, like, no matter what you do, like, people will complain. It's a joke to describe a common situation to define an operating mode. And, like, point blank, you should not humor this horseshit. This is like people screaming about master processes versus slave processes and screaming that that's well, too bad. That's an accurate language that describes what's going on. Like this is like we're really eating up a lot of time on this, but like this is a nonsense attitude. Like a name is a descriptive name. If you're offended by it, like grow up.
Well, but a maidservant can also be a man. So using, using the word maid as is actually used in the real term, that's not discriminating for gender. I'm just saying it's like more inclusive to like just call it spouse, because that could be anyone.
I mean,
The whole
okay.
point, spouse or maid, because that then people will get the association that that's what you're trying to call. You're naming it after, a well-known term in information security.
All right. Well, for sure, we're going to get back onto that. I mean, like you're saying, I mean, we're eating up a bunch of time about something, but that's in the show notes. We're going to get right back to it, man. Like maybe we should jump into what's going on with Bitcoin Core and this title. And you've already got guys confused as to what's going on. I mean, I couldn't properly artwork Bitcoin Core. What is this?
Oh my God, dude, it's over. Bitcoin Core was acquired by Neutrino, a chain analysis company. Oh my God.
I didn't get the title. That's why it's called. This is the title. Okay. Good to know. So, should I start? All right. Bitcoin Core merged Neutrino filters. And actually, I feel super stupid because I was watching that pull request for a very, very long time on GitHub, and I was always checking, hey, what happened, but I didn't realize this was actually not the peer-to-peer communication. So it did not include the peer-to-peer communication. So the only thing it includes is that faster, it helps you with faster chain reindexing, and that's all. So Bitcoin Core nodes still won't serve neutrino filters, so that's a boomer there. I thought it does, but actually, as far as I know, as I see, there is no pull request for that yet. But anyway, we are getting there. It's slow, but we are getting there. Yeah, just a quick reiteration of why is it good that to serve neutrino filters is because that would be the only light wallet architecture that doesn't fail against network analysis. Okay, that was the background. Now, just a little bit get back to a more important topic. We cannot name it lurking spouse mode because honestly, when someone said that on Twitter, I'm not an English native speaker, and I actually had to look up the word what spouse means. It just it's man, not good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But with the neutrino filter merge in Core though, I mean I think that's like it's a step in a direction that I think is going to keep happening. I mean, like if it's merged and they're already supporting filters for use in index building, then that means like there's now a local database to build the filters, to maintain them, to use them internally. And so it's a much shorter step to actually serving them to people. I mean, if you're going to have the code complexity to actually use the filters internally, then it's a very small increase in complexity to simply serve those.
Yes, 100% agree. And in fact, they don't even have to serve peer-to-peer. It would be just enough if they would give it to RPC. So anyone with, they would have to serve peer-to-peer in order to be it's really great. But anyone we would be able to serve if they add it to their PC, right? In Wasabi, we might even just change it to, we have a very complex filter building logic, and maybe we just change it, and then we would be able to handle every kind of addresses, not only batch 32 ones. So that would be really nice too. If they, or can I just look at the disk and look at the filters and take it from there. I'm not sure. I think that would be problematic, because core might change something and problems come up. So anyway, yeah, it's a great direction. I wonder what's next, what they are going to do next, and let's see.
Yeah, and I'd be happy with just exposing it through the RPC, because like trying to interact with a database that core is touching, like that could run into a lot of conflicts. And I mean, like my main problem with like this whole issue is not like serving filters so that people can create like most work SPV wallets. I think that's a dangerous wallet design and a bad idea, but just making it easier for people actually building wallets. Like if you expose it through an RPC, then you've just made the lives of any developer building a wallet trying to work around neutrino filters a million times easier. And instead of hacking together their own solution like you had to, it's just make an RPC call.
Yeah, exactly. You know how long for us it takes to build the filters? At the very first time, it took 2 weeks. Now it took about a day, and Bitcoin Core took 2 hours. Man, they are doing so much bit and byte level micro optimizations that it's amazing. And yeah, so many reviews. So I'm looking forward to it. It's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess any more on this before we get into a stretch of financial issues?
No, I'm all about getting into these issues. Let's dig into it.
Alrighty. Well, Blockstream and Digital Garage are back in the news doing something very neat. Although I'm going to have to say I'm very angry with you, Nopara, because the Blockstream story wasn't the first story. I actually lose my bonus every time we cover things they do. But it's pretty much
But
very...
it was Blockstream's core story, so...
But Bitcoin Core doesn't pay bonuses for talking about them.
All right, go ahead.
But yeah, so they've kind of taken a concept called discrete log contracts, which Thaddeus Dryja from MIT came up with a while ago, and used it to create a very trust minimized equivalent of a conventional financial product. I'm sure that anybody who trades at all or follows the kind of financial side of news in this space is familiar with futures contracts. And it's pretty much you arrange to purchase something at a price set now at some point in the future. And they work in 2 different ways, really. Either actually settling with the physical asset at the time of settlement, or pretty much the loser on the side of the contract actually just pays the difference in terms of the current price versus the arranged price of the contract. And futures contracts are a very standardized thing. They're set up in specific denominations. They're traded and settled on exchanges. They can be transferred around. So I can enter into a futures contract and exit it, selling off my side of that to somebody else. And it's a very structured, standardized type of financial product to gain exposure to the potential price appreciation of assets, to hedge potential depreciations in price for assets you hold. But it's kind of similar to something called a forward contract, which is pretty much like a futures contract, except it's not standardized and it's not generally cleared on an exchange. It's more of a customized contract between 2 parties that is handled outside of a order book exchange. And the benefits of this is kind of, in a standardized futures contract, there's set denominations and amounts. They're settled regularly. Whereas a forward contract can be completely customized to a unique amount. It does not settle on a regular basis. It settles when the actual forward contract expires. And because of this, it can be a lot more useful for hedging things because you can customize and tailor them specifically to the amount and the asset that you're trying to hedge. Although they do present a decent amount of risk because you can have wild price swings, and if you are not collateralized enough, if things go outside the bounds of collateralization, they can cause a lot of insolvency problems. But that aside, one of the biggest risks of a forward contract in conventional things is that you're not using a clearinghouse or an exchange to handle things. It's essentially just an agreement between two parties, and you have to hope that they actually follow through in the end when the contract expires. And so because of this, forward contracts are a very closed off thing where people very carefully assess who they actually enter into the contract with. Well, using Dryja's discrete log contract proposal, Blockstream and Crypto Garage have actually constructed these in really the most trustless way that you can, although they're still not completely trustless. And to kind of break down what a discrete log contract is, let's say that there's two people who want to enter into a forward contract on the price of Bitcoin. One is shorting it and one is longing it. Well, what you would do in a discrete log contract is effectively create a transaction funding a multi-sig output, kind of like you would in the Lightning Network. Except what you would do before signing and confirming that is decide an oracle that is going to tell you what the price is at the expiry of the contract. And effectively, this oracle would have a different key for each potential price that it could be at the time of the expiration. So let's say Bitcoin contracts, some exchanges, they have minimum price movements. So a price has to move, say, at least 1 cent up or down in terms of denominations, and there can't be any more granular changes than that. So each cent denomination of the price that could be possible would have its own public key. And the two participants in the contract would sign a transaction for each individual potential price that could be, allocating the correct amount of Bitcoin so that the loser is paying the difference between the contract price and what the price would actually be to the winner of the bet. And each output of that would effectively lock things with the user's key and the appropriate oracle key for that specific price. And so when the contract went to expire, you would have the user submit that transaction. The other side of the party would immediately gain their funds. And then the person who submitted the transaction would take the signature from the oracle broadcasting the transaction, or not the oracle broadcasting the price at the time, and its own signature, and then claim the output that they've won in the contract. And like Lightning Network, that output would have a time-locked penalty, effectively, so that if somehow somebody was able to, or somebody submitted the old channel state, effectively is kind of what it is, the other party would be able to claim all of the funds. And so attempting to cheat, even though you would need the appropriate oracle signature to do so, which you would not have unless the oracle was malicious, the other party could just claim everything in the contract. And see, the interesting thing about this is with a discrete log contract like this, you can set this up so that the oracle doesn't know that anybody is doing a contract using them. because all of that information is in the unbroadcasted transactions. And so an oracle doesn't even know who is using them as an oracle in this contract. And so they would simply just publicly broadcast their price as an oracle with their signature, and then anybody using them would simply fulfill the contract. And, you know, I think a lot of people out there might really get kind of bored when they see things like this in the news, but like this is really one of the most important things that you can do with the smart contracting capabilities of Bitcoin is you can take these kind of financial products that right now depend entirely on trusting a financial institution, and you can start gradually removing layers of trust from them. And that's, you know, that's something that contributes and moves us forward to a whole financial system that isn't dependent entirely on these trusted third-party intermediaries. And, you know, it's a very important thing going forward. And so Blockstream and Crypto Garage have tested this on the actual Bitcoin main chain, but they're going to be working in the near future to bring this functionality to Liquid, which is kind of, you know, bolstering and bringing more use cases to that platform in terms of actually having, you know, more distributed financial products that are the types of things that legacy players actually are looking for as you know, use cases for these assets in this space.
Yeah, man, this sounds awesome. I mean, Blockstream, of course, you know, I gotta say it, knocking it out of the park again. I mean, like trying to find a way to build out these forward contracts in a more trustless way. I mean, that's a great thing for the space, like you're saying. I mean, it's one of those topics where not everybody is fully aware of what is going on with futures contracts and what exactly they're doing. But you could place a hedge like that in a market, you know, and you can use that to actually price in different assets. Like it's going to help build out the robustness of the system. I mean, we're going to start seeing more futures contracts as well. And so, yeah, it's great to get these, like you're saying, these, what is it? I just lost what it was, the discrete log forward contract. Yeah. So it's going to be neat to see these things going forward. And yeah, Liquid is just getting really built out with a bunch of different utility there. It's almost kind of crazy how I go to these meetups with all these blockchain guys, and just about every time now I'm thinking like, you know, why don't we just put that on a federated side chain?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the core purpose of Liquid is arbitrage between exchanges, but I mean, I really don't think people realize how much volume and value is really handled right now, or you know, being processed by these kinds of over-the-counter financial products that right now just boil down to effectively we just have to trust each other that we're not going to fuck the other person over. And, you know, as much as Liquid is useful for maturing arbitrage in the space, it's going to be just as, if not more useful for adding, you know, ways to minimize trust in these kind of OTC products.
Oh man, yeah, it's kind of crazy how you could really see the way this future is going to be built out. Like things are really starting to scale in an incredible way. I mean, like where we are now from where we were 2 years ago, it's just incredible. So yeah, the future's looking bright. Lightning Network and Liquid federated side chains, and you know, now with we'll get in later with all what's going on with Wasabi. A lot of stuff going on. It's awesome.
Alrighty, so I guess let's talk about an attempt at financial products that is a little less intelligent and a lot more completely stupid.
Oh man. All right, well, let's hear about it.
So Afghanistan, Tunisia, and Uzbekistan are talking to the IMF about Bitcoin bonds. Although at least in the case of Tunisia and Afghanistan, they really, the details I've seen for this aren't explicitly clear about whether they're just talking about bonds on a blockchain system or actual Bitcoin bonds. They reference Hyperledger Fabric from IBM a number of times and aren't really that clear in what they're saying, at least publicly, but Uzbekistan has explicitly talked about a Bitcoin bond in terms of attempting to tie one to their cotton futures. And like this, to me, like I imagine a lot of people have seen this news and started jumping up and down about nations finally caving to Bitcoin. But like this is, at this time, at this level of market maturity, one of the most absolutely stupid things that a country could possibly do. Like a bond is effectively, you give them money and they give you a bond that is going to accrue interest and give you, at the end of the maturation of that bond, all the money you gave them back plus interest. And so when you're talking about a Bitcoin bond that's denominated in Bitcoin, that would have nominal interest paid in Bitcoin, given how small this space is, how underdeveloped it is, and the insane levels of growth that are still in front of us, the idea of a nation issuing a Bitcoin bond is absolutely batshit crazy, and is one of the easiest ways in the world to completely ruin your nation's credit standing and scare away foreign investment that I could possibly think of. Because just imagine this. Somebody gives you 10 Bitcoin for a Bitcoin bond. Right now, that's what, $25,000 or roughly around there. Okay. Now, or I'm sorry, no, that's 50,000. Math is not my strong suit. But you take that, and now you go invest that in something. You do something with that. And you have to pay them back that 10 Bitcoin at the end of the day, plus interest on that percentage-wise in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin spikes to $500,000. Where are you going to get that Bitcoin back? Where is that going to come from in order to pay that bond back at maturation plus interest? Like the simple fact is this space is way too early to be talking about any kind of product like this denominated in Bitcoin, because the second that price starts going parabolic, we enter a deflationary spiral. You're fucked. You're not going to be able to pay that back, and you're going to have to default on your bond. And that's you're just going to completely ruin your standing in the international community, your credit rating. You're going to make investors internationally look at you as an untrustworthy place to invest their money. So this is just absolutely stupid. And given the specific countries doing this, I have to half wonder if this is not just some kind of attempt at an exit scam to just get their hands on a decent amount of Bitcoin and then pretty much just go, tough shit, we have this Bitcoin now. Because trying to do a product like this at this time is just insane.
Yeah, I'm wondering like if this thing is ever really feasible. I mean, like that's just a matter of fact with Bitcoin and the way its liquidity works, that it would be impossible, I think, to actually return accrued interest in Bitcoin. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, this is just a disaster, setup. But like you're saying, I mean, you know, as far as trustworthy sources, I mean, we're talking about Afghanistan, Tunisia, and Uzbekistan. I mean, you know, those are countries we know of, but as far as like in good standing with trust, I mean, I don't know that much about, Tunisia, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. I don't know. It's hard to tell, but do you think if like they redrew like the mechanics of the bond, like then it could be something they could do as far as like interest actually being paid out in like local fiat or something?
Well, no, because if it's not denominated in fiat or interest paid, or if it's denominated in fiat or the interest is paid in fiat, why would I buy your bond instead of just holding my Bitcoin? Like that's a retarded idea. And I mean, it's just, you know, something like this might be feasible in like 20 years when Bitcoin is much larger, much more stable and less volatile. And you can actually project how it's going to appreciate long term and weigh that against like the interest you're promising, but like right now, it's insane.
Yeah, sounds pretty insane, man. I mean, like these countries definitely need to build out a little bit more of the tech sector there in their country, and the finance side of things too. And so, they could actually start building out sensible products.
Mm-hmm. So I guess anybody have any comments on the impending nation state exit scam? No part.
No, it's sad, but no.
Alrighty then. Dive into the next one. So CoinDesk recently had a chat with Giancarlo, the chairman of the CFTC, and he didn't make really any direct comments on Bakkt per se, but a lot of the issues that he talked about really kind of shine a lot of light about why Bakkt is still delayed at this point and not getting CFTC approval. And effectively, like one of the biggest issues that the CFTC is looking at in terms of crypto products is really the custody. And so this kind of draws into Bakkt's plan to self-custody their own crypto. And when you look at this, it's really it's kind of a bifurcated system where you have a lot of the clearing houses and things actually moving these futures regulated federally under the Commodity Exchange Act. But a lot of these clearing houses don't actually hold custody and use banks or trusts that are regulated under state law to actually custody things. And while people or firms can have the clearinghouse itself custody the assets, a lot of them relegate this to the state level trust or banks to do so. And right now, Bakkt isn't really licensed or regulated with anything required on a state or federal level to actually handle this. And this kind of goes to a little comparison with Ledger X, if anybody's familiar, is another futures product or company offering futures product for Bitcoin, is moving to attempt to do physically settled futures as well in the near future. But they have actually applied and been approved as a swap execution facility and a derivatives clearing organization. So they are a regulated clearinghouse that can custody these things themselves. And when we kind of look at Bakkt specifically seeking CFTC approval versus a lot of other companies that have kind of just self-assessed themselves and launched these products, like you are able to effectively launch something without the CFTC as long as you can certify that your product is complying with regulations, which is what Ledger X actually went through and did. And the reason that Bakkt hasn't is because they are proposing this self-custody that would require an exemption from the CFTC for current regulations without actually going through the licensure process. And that's very likely what's kind of been holding things up, because the main issue that the CFTC is concentrating on is really like the custody of crypto assets and how that's going to be handled. And so, very recently, I think last week, there was an announcement that Bakkt is attempting to seek a license from New York State, which would likely be to form a trust to actually self-custody these things. And so at this point, it seems to me, just looking at this all circumstantially, that the CFTC is kind of hesitant to just grant them a blanket exemption to traditional custody requirements. And so Bakkt is actually seeking a trust license to custody things under current state regulations in New York. And, whether they end up acquiring that license or a CFTC exemption, I mean, ultimately, this really just comes down to cutting through the red tape one way or another before something can actually launch. And given that Ledger X in the near future is going to be attempting to launch physically settled futures, with the appropriate licensing as a clearinghouse to self-custody these things, I can't imagine Bakkt is going to be stopped because of this. It's simply a matter of in which way are they going to comply with the CFTC, either acquiring a state license in New York or being granted an exemption. And so, yet again, we'll see how long this takes.
Yeah, it looks like that late April discussion about Bakkt futures being launched might be held up again till later this year. I mean, who knows how long it's actually going to take, but it's just like getting the necessary steps and mechanical things in place. And, this all wouldn't actually be here unless it was like major players like this trying to put it together and getting responses from the SEC and CFTC on how exactly all this stuff should be set up. So, yeah, it's a slow process, but I mean, eventually these things will come out. I mean, you just can't ignore, Microsoft, Starbucks, and the Intercontinental Exchange getting together to try and bring this thing out. And like you're saying, I mean, it just has to do with making sure that the custody's in the right place. And yeah, I mean, these physically delivered futures and the way that works out, it's like, you got to have all these pieces in the right place to where it could be considered a regulated product.
All right, so Janine, Nopara, come on, do you guys say something? There's more to Bitcoin Landia than software.
I'm not that. I'm usually silent about these political topics because I don't understand any of them.
I am in favor of lurking waifu.
Nice.
That's going to be the real topic of today, is trying to figure out how to rename that feature.
You're dead to me if you do it. But Rick, I guess you want to take us into the next one?
All right. Yeah, let's get into this. So, talking about market structure and market dynamics, we can't leave out what's going on in the mining ecosystem. Last episode, we talked about the igniting price war in Sichuan over cheap electricity contracts and problems with miners moving into the Iranian market. Well, now we've got an update out of the Eastern European country of Belarus, whose president just recently announced the IT sector that he'd like to help build out a digital ecosystem for the country, which will include a data center for Bitcoin mining built adjacent to the new Belarusian nuclear power plant. This nuclear power plant has been under construction since late 2012, early 2013, but it has been a project in the making since 2007. This new source of power for Belarus is set to help the country's energy needs for the foreseeable future and help break their dependence on foreign fossil fuels. It's been a project that required an estimated $11 billion, and it's been partly funded by Russia. The facility will be producing around 2,400 megawatts of electricity, which a portion of that will be dedicated to the new data center. President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is said to be a man of the people, and he had this to say on the subject, quote, "You are my children. I've created you with my own hands as well as I could. You wanted cryptocurrency, crypto exchanges, crypto mining, and the rest. You wanted to set up farms. Now you are grown up and can suggest where we move on from here. We are going to move in this direction as effectively and as far as you would like," close quote. He then reassured the sector that they will help build the data center infrastructure and that, quote, "I will not let anyone offend you," close quote. Which I imagine the strong language is to help attract mining firms to the area to set up contracts with the new power plant. Like we reported last episode, the market signal of just cheap electricity, like is found in Iran, has led to unknown regulatory red tape and major losses for mining firms moving to the country. Well, now with not just the promise of cheap nuclear power, but a commitment to the community driving the tech sector might help qualm some of those fears. Lukashenko has asked the IT community to put forward their wants and needs for the project while promising to keep space open in the new facility dedicated to Bitcoin mining and selling activities. The new power plant should be up and running by the end of this year, but the Belarusian president is set to release his final decision on the new digital economy for the country by the second quarter of this year. So it's likely we'll be coming back to this story once we hear more details on that. And it'll likely be sometime next year before we really start to see some miners moving into these new facilities. Belarus sits closely to many other major players in the Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem, and it looks like they are going to compete in that market. This news sounds promising for the area, and we'll have to see how things play out. In researching the nuclear facility, there have been some reports of shoddy construction methods that could hinder the project. However, there has been enough money spent and promises made to where I don't see much more than a possible delay to its start. This is just one aspect towards Belarus's makeover of their electricity grid and tech sector. They are also building out 4 hydropower stations and wind facilities to add another 420 megawatts of power. So it looks like Belarus is positioning themselves pretty well for the oncoming Bitcoin and crypto revolution. But yeah, what do you guys think about nuclear-powered Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, I mean, I think, compared to insanely, crazy bonds that are not going to be economically viable, this is a much more intelligent way to actually try to incentivize ecosystem expansion in your country. And I mean, depending on what the actual price is by kilowatt hour, there's definitely an advantage to something like hydro, which can be very seasonal and fluctuate as far as the actual, production output of energy. So it's definitely something that's more predictable in terms of availability. I mean, I know obviously that they didn't build this plant specifically for Bitcoin mining, but it's kind of been a running joke for a couple of years now on when some country is going to build a nuclear power plant for Bitcoin mining. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, really, because this is something I think they could long term actually bring parts of this ecosystem to that country. And if they keep the jurisdiction friendly to it, like, that's a very smart long-term move.
This is extremely dangerous. I mean, using nuclear power plants to mine Bitcoin. I don't know. It just even just for simply using it to do our own electricity in our own house. I don't know, man. It's something that goes beyond the micro and it has macro. It has potential macro consequences which are devastating.
Yeah, dude, if you're gonna try and say that nuclear power is unsafe, get the fuck out of here with that shit. No power.
Well, it's certainly got a bad rep. Go ahead, no power. I'm sorry.
My point was that if you are, so where do you put the line, right? If you're living in an apartment and holding and keeping under your bed a bunch of explosives, that's probably not a good thing, is it?
No, Para, more people have died in a single year from hydro dams collapsing than have been killed by nuclear power plant accidents since nuclear fission was invented.
Sure, but they are not just killing people. That would be the nice thing they would do. That's the nicest thing they could do to people,
Yeah.
Well, get comfortable with coal and fossil fuels, or accept nuclear power, because those are the feasible options.
Yeah, I get where No Power is coming from. I mean, we see things like Fukushima and 3 Mile Island and just Chernobyl, areas where there's just been a complete damage to the ecosystem. And we don't know how long we can actually, inform people that that's a problem there. I think one of the most interesting problems with nuclear waste is this idea of how to inform a public that you don't know what their language is going to be when they get there, to let them know that there is this terrible thing there that will get them sick and eventually put them in a bad spot. But yeah, I mean, like, what's that? Geez, man, what's that element where it's like, how come we don't use nuclear power on? Damn it, what's that element? There's an element that makes it a lot cleaner.
Thorium reactors.
I knew you were going to remember it before I could look it up. All right, yeah, thorium. Like, I mean, there's just like these sort of answers. I mean, like, nuclear is definitely an answer, and there's definitely problems with that answer as well. But I really think it's all about just driving renewables and everything. Like we're seeing these, like Shinobi mentioned. I mean, they've got hydro plants coming down the way and wind farms, and we're seeing more of these seasonal activities with miners moving in to take advantage of those renewable resources. And I think as long as that value proposition is there, we'll at least see, competitive energy industries being built out. Because right now, it's really hard to actually debate these energy arguments because there's so much money on either side trying to push a narrative. So it's really hard to say.
Well, I mean, it's this simple. We all know the downsides and risks of fossil fuels and coal. Solar power is not practical beyond putting one on your own house off the grid. We just can't store the energy. Wind, has its own potential issues with bird populations, and you can't really scale that up everywhere. It's environmental. Hydropower only works where there is enough, water energy for that. So you can't do that everywhere. And that also has a shit ton of ecological concerns. Whereas nuclear power done right has enough energy, it's predictable enough, and does not have environmental concerns. So, like, it's either do nuclear power right or deal with all the problems of everything else.
You gonna say something no further?
Yeah, I was, but yeah, okay. So, but we have a consensus issue because we're not going to stop talking about it. We have a consensus issue here that nuclear power done right. How do you check that it's done right? And how do you trust the people who checked that it's done right? Like, how do you solve these problems?
Well, you don't build uranium reactors where you can have things like earthquakes. Like we've had better designs for decades, but we don't build any new plants. We just leave old, less safe ones online. And for everywhere it's not safe to build uranium plants, build thorium plants. Those do not have any risk of meltdown or environmental damage, and they can't be used to make nuclear weapons. Like, those two things.
Yeah, there's definitely a long debate here, and we could keep going on. So, just in the interest of time, let's dig into the next mining ecosystem story because, it's not in yet. All right, so turning from Eastern Europe to the Far East, we know that there has been a running battle to be the first mining company to IPO. Well, what if there's already a listed company secretly mining? News brought to us by 8BTC reports on a publicly listed construction company, Huate, and their subsidiary, Huate Henang. Huate Henang was set to be a cloud computing service, and the subsidiary of the construction company raised around $25 million. Then they bought 36,500 servers from Avalon and eBang, which we know are two giants in the manufacturing of mining equipment. That's not all that ties them to the mining ecosystem. They had such terrible losses in 2018 that they had to sell the company. According to financial reports of late 2018 and late February of this year from the parent company, Huate Henang lost 90% of its value, around $23 million last year. That means the company only sold for 12 million yuan or $2 million. The low price reselling of the company has caught the eye of the crypto community, as it could be the first listed company to actually be engaged in the crypto ecosystem, even though it may operate under the title of cloud computing. We've seen heavy losses across major players in the mining ecosystem since the bear market began in late 2017, early 2018. Luckily, those players are focused on the long game and are always hedging their position while searching out cheap contracts. The mining game in Bitcoin doesn't take any prisoners, and it looks like Wade is figuring that out the hard way. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more companies out there like this who are publicly listed and are working out R&D in the unignorable crypto ecosystem. But yeah, so it looks like some people were maybe doing some mining that are already listed. But yeah, what do you guys think? Were these guys just a cloud computing company, or were they dabbling in their, a market they might not have should have been?
Well, it wouldn't really shock me at all, but like this is exactly why you don't just jump into things willy-nilly. And I mean, it's a very cutthroat, very fast changing landscape in the ecosystem. And I mean, it's really just completely stupid on every level to try to diversify into mining unless you are able to eat a loss. And I mean, like, I have to point at GMO in Japan. Like, that is a massive, technology conglomerate with multiple subsidiaries. And they spun up everything from production to mining themselves and ended up eating like a loss that was hundreds of millions of dollars. But they were big enough to write that off and move forward. Like, it's really like, it just seems like this company like did not think this through and did not consider the fact that they might have a loss that they couldn't come back from.
It sounds like that, the rage of 2017 caught their eyes, just like it caught a lot of people, and they started making an early investment without really knowing full well what they're getting involved in. And you know how everybody, when they initially come into this ecosystem, they're like, well, I want to be a miner, and like, so yeah, they did that. And yeah, like you're saying, the mining ecosystem is very cutthroat. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you will lose. And if you lose, then you're going to be out, because there's not a way to buy back all your stuff. I mean, you're going to have to start reselling equipment, and you're going to have to sell for a loss. So yeah, any more comment on this secret mining in China?
Nope.
All right. Well, then let's go to another topic in mining. But this one, I don't know, is a little bit more comical here. So the discussion about the mining ecosystem and potential gains or losses, let's talk about BSV. BitMEX Research put out a little information on Twitter where they show their estimation of potential losses or gains for both the major Bitcoin forks. If you look in the information field, it shows their formula for reaching this conclusion. They take the number of coins mined and multiply it by the current price to attain their revenue, and then subtract that lower bound electricity cost to operate, which puts BSV operating at a loss around $5.4 million. Of course, one problem in the mining ecosystem leads to another, and in the second tweet from BitMEX, we can see BSV has already suffered two separate reorgs. First was a 3-block reorg, and then another 6-block deep reorg. This temporary chain split happened on April 18th and was due to poor block propagation. Here's a statement on the matter from their blog post. Quote, "The block sizes were particularly large during the period of the reorganizations. On the fork chain, the last two blocks were 128 megabytes and 107 megabytes, respectively. On the main chain, many of the blocks were over 50 megabytes. Therefore, in our view, it is likely the large sizes of the blocks were the root cause of the reorganizations, as miners couldn't propagate and verify these blocks fast enough before other blocks on different chains were found." Close quote. While all this trouble has been cropping up, it appears they were fortunate enough to get by without a double spin. BitMEX Research says, quote, "Based on our analysis of all the transactions, the transaction IDs from the fork chain eventually made it back to the main chain, with the obvious exception of the Coinbase transactions. Therefore, it is our belief that no double spins occurred in relation to this incident." Close quote. Now, BitMEX Research stopped short of drawing any real conclusions to the safety or use of BSV, but it's hard to ignore these data points. I mean, I don't know where Truth Monster is in the chat, but you might be able to ignore these Calvin Iyer, Gigamegs, or his underage escapades. You might be able to be okay with the idea of Fake Toshi passing out lawsuits to silence critics, but it's hard to ignore technical data that prove your network is insecure. So yeah, that's some funny stuff going on with BSV. Do you guys have any comment on that?
Yeah, Big Blocks totally works, bro. We're gonna scale to 3 billion people.
Oh man.
I mean, it's absurd, and like the funniest part about like this kind of failure is all of the things that could help mitigate these issues. They'll never do them because they were developed by Bitcoin Core developers, and they air quote changed the protocol from Satoshi's true vision. But it's funny. It's because like you can solve this particular issue of blocks propagating, but at the end of the day, that doesn't change anything about it centralizing nodes, creating a subclass of people in control of the consensus process with no way for users to actually participate in that. And it's silly. They can't even take the next step to make it look like it can work because they've dug in with the no, we're not changing anything. Except this one thing that's the stupidest thing you could try to change ever.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, like, I feel like the word shit show was made for BSV and basically the whole Bitcoin Cash fork and the way that's playing out. I mean, I mean, like you reap what you sow, and I mean, it's kind of crazy that they are just at least blatant about the fact that they understand it's, they push that whole narrative of like you shouldn't be running a full node and all that stuff, and it's, yeah, it's really a shit show. All right, if there's not any more comment on BSV and what is the craziness over there, you want to take us into what's going on with some FSB guys over there, Janine?
Yep, I'm just getting it open. Okay, so apparently some Force Bridges copycats have been busy in Russia because 2 agents from the Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, which is the successor to the KGB, are facing fraud charges worth about $1 million worth, or 65 million rubles. Because while they were investigating a media director named Arast Gulamov for fraud, they decided to blackmail him for that amount and required that he pay in Bitcoin. One of the agents also, quote, used an alternative identity and contacted Alexander, ordering him to leave the country. Well, they contacted his son as well, and they said that he should pay them as well. Otherwise, he would face similar charges to his father. And both the father and son were reportedly working with a different branch of the FSB. And they reported this activity to them, and these transactions were then linked to the wallets of the agents, and that's how they were caught. So both agents have pled guilty to those charges, but unfortunately it's suspected that there are several other FSB agents that are probably involved in the overall extortion scheme that they haven't identified. And in the article about this written by Hardfork at the Next Web, it ends by saying, one thing is for sure, fraud investigators are probably the last people we would expect to be carrying out fraud crimes. And I would just like to say that actually, no, FSB and DEA agents, like in the Ross Ulbricht case, are exactly who I would expect to be carrying out fraud, because just like I expect bankers to probably be the biggest bank robbers around because they control the money, the people who are investigating fraud are probably don't have entirely clean hands. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Welcome to Russia. I mean, like, seriously, like, it's, yeah, this is not shocking on any level whatsoever. Like, modern day Russia, literally, it was effectively created by the former Soviet police state and intelligence community carving out an oligopoly for themselves and maintaining, whether it's political or economic, just influence in general in the country from the fall of the Soviet Union up to the modern day. I mean, this this just seems like par for the course.
Yeah, no kidding, right? And I mean, exactly like you're saying, Janine. I mean, like the DEA agents in the Ross Ulbricht case, and I mean, it usually is. There's always some, these organizations are pretty big, even though they are, rather small in their decision making and everything. I mean, and there's always some people out there on the ends who feel like they're not getting paid like what they should be, and they look through their little list of information they have and they see who the honeypots are and they go after them. And it's one of the dangers about that whole mo money mo problems thing. It'll just pop up. All right, so yeah, take us from that to this other guy that got mo problems from making mo money.
Well, this guy he doesn't appear to have been doing this for money. But on April 20th, the Thai Navy seized the floating cabin of a 46-year-old guy, Chad Elwartowski, who is a U.S. citizen from Michigan, and his Thai girlfriend, Suprani Tepdet, also known as Bitcoin Girl Thailand or Nadia Summer Girl. And they are reportedly being charged with, quote, violating Thai sovereignty because they claim that the house would undermine Thailand's national security as well as the economic and social interests of maritime nations. Now, that seems pretty extreme because if you look at it, it's literally like, it's like a little raised platform in the middle of the ocean. It's not that large. And the weird part is actually that the structure was outside of Thailand's jurisdiction, but it was within the 200-mile exclusive economic zone. So apparently that still counts as Thailand's jurisdiction somehow. Don't know how that works, but Reuters reports that neither Chad nor his girlfriend were on board at the time of the seizure because they apparently decided to leave after they spotted a surveillance drone flying overhead the day before. And the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok says that I haven't seen any news about the girlfriend, but Chad apparently engaged a lawyer and is being provided with appropriate assistance. And the reason this is a Bitcoin story is only because both of them they call themselves Bitcoin traders. And obviously, there's this idea of self-sovereignty and money, but obviously there's a lot of other ideas about self-sovereignty beyond money. And so by the same token, I'm sure that at least some authoritarian governments have made this argument before, but I think that if it's acceptable for a state to claim that, some people are violating their national sovereignty by merely operating with an alternative, construct that's not even in their official jurisdiction, but if they could also claim that someone is violating their sovereignty by, using an alternative currency within an economic zone that they claim. So I can easily see some kind of state, if they haven't already, claiming that Bitcoin violates national sovereignty by being used as an alternative currency within an economic zone. I mean, I see that happening. Like it's not very far away from this kind of case where they, I mean, there's a ton of people who they take floating, cabins or boats around the world. And just because it's they're apparently part of a seasteading movement. So it's like a political thing for them. But there's a lot of people who live on houseboats full time. And, I'm sure that comes with all kinds of restrictions and getting permits and stuff, even though, supposedly if you're in international waters, you shouldn't have to do that. I don't know, I find this case really sad because apparently in Thailand, you can act this, like if he's convicted of this, he could apparently face the death penalty because violating national sovereignty is a really big deal. I mean, we saw a similar claim with the Assange case recently where Ecuador, destroyed his asylum illegally on the basis that it was like an act of national sovereignty, which makes no sense because all of the international human rights legislation, especially for Latin America, says that you can't claim national sovereignty as a justification for violating someone's human rights, especially not asylum. So yeah, the story is really sad, and I think the charges are really overblown because literally it's just a small little structure. Like the idea that was a threat to their national security is really just borderline stupid.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead. No.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to throw in that this reminds me a bit of the case of Liberland, right? Where there is Serbia and Croatia, and there is a small island which none of them claims. But when Liberland people wanted to actually claim that and went there, then police take them away. So they are basically camping next to the island of Liberland. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, ethically, I agree with you, Janine, but I mean, it's practically in the real world, like, what the fuck did this guy expect to happen here? Like, Thailand is a constitutional monarchy that has been ruled by the military after a coup for the past 5 years. Like, what did he expect to happen? Like that, I mean, it's like nowhere in the world can you sit here and honestly say that you think you can just get away with no consequences, pretty much telling the world, fuck you, I'm my own country. Like, as much as I ethically agree with it, that's just living in a fantasy land. And I mean, especially in Thailand, it's mind-boggling to me that he would try this there when, despite being a monarchy ruled by the military, I mean, as long as you don't insult the king or fuck with the government, I mean, they pretty much let you do whatever the fuck you want in that country.
I mean, I don't agree with that at all, but I mean, first of all, he wasn't, as I said, he's not even in Thailand's jurisdiction officially. He was in an economic zone that they claim to be in. When economic zones are, cited, that usually has to do with like, oh, this is where you have fishing rights or whatever. So that's not the same as a jurisdiction. That's like where you're allowed to conduct, economic activity. So I'm sure, there might be other countries that share that same zone. I didn't look it up, but I don't know, maybe he just wasn't familiar with how the Thai government would react to, I'm sure there's plenty of boats who go through that zone all the time. Just because he calls it a house, his house is effectively a boat. He probably didn't know what the limitations were on that. And he probably didn't assume that they would respond this strongly, especially when he wasn't officially in their jurisdiction.
Well, I mean, as far as like I saw on the designs, it's not really a boat. It's a stationary platform that has to be towed. But it's he's sitting right outside of the coast of Thailand, thumbing his nose at them. And it's like, I don't see him being that ignorant. He's obviously spent some time there. He's dating a Thai woman. Like, it's very clear in my mind what the reaction would have been. I mean, it's a criminal offense literally to insult the king in Thailand. Like he should have seen this coming. As much as, like I said, I ethically agree with you. Like, this is a real world we live in, and what's ethically right should not be the sole thing governing how you mitigate your risks.
I'd just like
and the other thing, I don't know if I mentioned it, but he had a visa to be in Thailand, so it wasn't like he was, even if he had been in the jurisdiction of Thailand, he wasn't in there illegally. Like, he had a visa to be there, and obviously his girlfriend was Thai. So she had a right to be there. Now, whether they had a right to build a construction in the economic zone that they claim, you know, that, like I said, this was probably under normal circumstances, this would just be a licensing violation or something. They didn't have like the permits or whatever to be there, whatever that may be. But to say that they're a threat to national sovereignty is insane. And that's why, like, I don't agree with this premise that, you know, Thailand is a free-for-all country as long as you don't insult the king. Like, it's only a free-for-all unless you do something that in any way insults or threatens the government there. Like anything they don't like not even an insult. If you do anything they don't like, they're just going to target you for any reason. Like any other government is just going to target whoever they want.
All right,
So
I got to come in
you
there.
might be,
I'm sorry.
okay, let me tell you this story. You might be expecting too much of the Thai government regarding respecting laws. Just one story. Prostitution is illegal in Thailand, and they wanted to. They set up safe family zones in Pattaya, where 40% of the people there who are living, the population, are working in prostitution some way or form. So they set up family zones, right? But starting out with prostitution being illegal. And then what did the prostitutes do? They set up their own family zones, dressed as little girls and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you are expecting Thai laws to be kept, they are more like probably recommendations, I guess. So just don't insult the king and you're fine, I guess. Or pay out your bribes properly. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine the governance there of Thailand is, you know, I mean, yeah, like they got a king. You don't really want to insult the king. I mean, you're in his land and everything. I think, but really the bigger thing to pay attention to here on all of this is like why somebody's in trouble doing this. I mean, we know China and Thailand, you know, they both disagree on what exactly they're doing. And like China wants to reabsorb Thailand and they're already making moves in the South China Sea. I mean, this is not far from there. And, you know, I imagine they take, you know, they take heed a lot of caution on like somebody building off their coast and saying like, well, is this guy some, you know, Chinese spy or something? I mean, just thinking like that's a bigger problem with them in the area to where maybe that's got some sort of sway on this decision. All right, though, if there's not any more comment on this, let's go into just a quick update. All right, so one Bitcoin trader that was put into a little hot water who can now breathe a sigh of relief is Charlie Shrem. We've been covering the Winklevoss twins lawsuit against Shrem since its inception in 2018, where the Winklevi were suing Shrem for some 5,000 Bitcoin he supposedly never turned over to the twins during the days of BitInstant. However, Charlie's lawyers fought back against the Gemini brothers to where the initial freeze of his assets were lifted, and now it appears he is fully exonerated. Bitcoin Magazine reports on published court records from the case earlier this month, where it appears both parties came to an agreement. On April 5th, paperwork filed said that there has been a settlement for an undisclosed amount and that the suit would be dismissed with prejudice as long as either party didn't reopen the case in the next 30 days. Just 11 days later, there was more paperwork filing saying, quote, "It is hereby stipulated by and among plaintiff Winklevoss Capital Fund and defendant Charlie Shrem by and through their respective counsel of record that the entire civil action be dismissed with prejudice. WCF and Shrem will each bear their own attorney fees and cost. This case will not be reopened." Close quote. So it appears like the court case has ended and everyone is bearing their own costs. I'm glad that they're doing that because, I mean, it seemed like a pretty petty move in the first place and the case was rather uninteresting. So hopefully this will be the last little update we get from this.
All right, now, Charlie, if you can take this as a sign of God that he has forgiven you and ordained you to stop shilling shit coins and advising ICOs, everything will be right.
Yeah, like let's see if that actually happens.
All right. So next up, I guess, is a development that should concern anybody who is regularly dealing with peer-to-peer trading of Bitcoins, specifically with cash. FinCEN, for the first time ever, has imposed a penalty on a trader, Eric Powers, for violating anti-money laundering regulations in his conducting of peer-to-peer trading of Bitcoin. And pretty much they're levying a civil penalty for failing to register as a money service business, having no written policies or procedures for complying with the Bank Secrecy Act, and failing to report his transactions or suspicious transactions, which are supposed to be reported with a SAR form, a suspicious activity report. And this is based on effectively, really the core point I think here is that he in sum traded around $5 million worth of Bitcoin over the time he'd been doing this, and conducted over 200 individual trades of more than $10,000. And so I really feel a little conflicted on this, because I think it's absolutely absurd that an individual person who is exiting a position that they've entered into financially by selling some of the asset they've invested in should fall into any kind of requiring them to register as a money service business, because unless they are buying and selling on a regular basis to arbitrage between order book exchanges for a premium, they are selling their own private property. And it's absurd to think that, you should have to register as a business to sell your own property. But given the amounts and the frequency here, I find it very hard to believe that he was not arbitraging between exchanges, unless this person is somebody who has been in this space for a very long time and acquired a very large amount of coins early on. But that said, this is pretty much just a civil penalty. So he was required to pay a fine of $35,350 and forfeit $100,000 in crypto assets. But he is serving no jail time, although he did have to enter into an agreement that would pretty much prohibit him from doing any of this kind of activity in the future. But this is kind of contrasting compared to Mr. Jacob Campos, who was charged for the same things by the U.S. Justice Department and is actually sentenced to 2 years in prison for the same things. And it's really just, ultimately, like there needs to be like explicit clarity on this, given the fact that you effectively have one government agency actually prosecuting and somebody being put in prison, while another agency is simply leveling a civil penalty in the form of a fine for the exact same thing. And like this is kind of similar to just the IRS and their vagueness regarding taxes. Like there needs to actually be clarity to what is or is not allowed in the government's mind, because it's just absolutely absurd that pretty much doing anything deeply involved in the space in a financial way is pretty much just playing Russian roulette with what agency could come after you, and just a complete inconsistency in what each individual agency would actually do if they come after you. I mean, it's a complete uncertainty, and that's just an absolutely absurd state of affairs for a market and an ecosystem that is this large at this point. Like like any kind of, as much as I think all of this kind of enforcement activity is unethical and just absurd in the first place, like if the governments are going to do this, they need to have clarity and consistency and not simply enforce things in a way that's just completely arbitrary and wildly different from one case to another.
I think that's the biggest takeaway of this whole thing is to see like, the separate penalties and one being much more harsh than the other. And yeah, this is where it's like, I know a lot of people don't like the idea of regulation, but it's just one of those things that I think we have to deal with. And it's one of those scary places where it's like, unless we get some sort of clear guidance on, this is the way you should behave. And like, if you're, one trader that just so happens to be trading a large volume of Bitcoin, and you have to register as a money management service, like that's something. It's just, nobody knew that. He didn't know that, but I mean, now he knows, and it's just a fine. At least he's not spending 2 years in prison. And this is where it's like, just the clarity on situations like this would make people a lot more adept to get into the space.
Yeah, I mean, like these regulations are ridiculous in the first place, but like if you're going to try and create and enforce regulations like this, do so consistently. I mean, there is an important distinction to make, regardless of people who think fuck government everywhere for all reasons, between actually having consistent rules that are enforced consistently versus just arbitrarily doing wildly different things depending on the day of the week or who's doing it. Like this, this is a fundamental aspect of why people have a problem with governments, is just inconsistency and arbitrary nonsense like this.
Well, in this case, I think that a lot of these governments are being inconsistent on purpose. Like they don't want to give people legal clarity, because if they do that, that means the rules are clear, and then people are less likely to get caught in these kinds of traps by accident. And, then they won't get a bunch of money from prosecuting cases that didn't have clear rules. And also that would mean more people would be willing to use it and adopt it, because there wouldn't be so much legal uncertainty. Now, why would they want that? Of course they don't want that. They would rather have people just stick with the national currency where they can control everything. They can have the banks, act as proxies for them and control your money directly. And so why would they even want legal clarity? That's why I don't hold my breath for any of these governments to do anything that makes sense, because their whole purpose for existence is to do things that doesn't make sense so that you remain dependent on them, as arbitrary as they are.
Not just that, but I mean, it's also one of the ways that they help control markets. It's like, somebody becomes too big of a fish. Well, good thing we had this law you didn't know about to, prosecute you with.
But I guess you want to take us into the next one, you need?
Oh, I didn't know it was next. Are you sure I'm next?
Yeah, the old.
Oh yeah,
the old
FinCEN,
favorite
yeah.
punching bag. You know what we're talking about.
I mean, this one is pretty short, because basically in the summer of 2018, Coinbase had opened a PAC, which stands for Political Action Committee. If you're not aware, that's basically an entity that accepts campaign contributions into a donation pool and then puts them towards supporting political candidates or legislation. And if you look at the campaign finance data, it doesn't look like they have either received or spent any money, which may be related to just not having the staff who can work on it. And so it appears that on April 3rd, they filed a termination report to close down the PAC. So looks like they do not currently have political ambitions at the moment, which is, you never know. They basically are one of these companies that is benefiting off of the, rotating doors in the financial sector, so might come back at any day.
I think this is pretty aligned with just how business has gone for them over the last year or so. Like they started this pretty much after the huge bull run, where they saw a huge increase in their revenue and trading volumes, and as we've been seeing lately, like they've seen a huge drop off in trading value and revenue over the last year, especially losing a lot of share to Binance, which I think factors into why they keep moving towards listing the new shitcoin of the week over the last year or so. And it just seems to me like they looked at the whole year like in the middle of the bull run, and we're just thinking we're piling cash in stacks. So start a pack and attempt to actually steer politicians in a Bitcoin, or probably in their case, crypto friendly direction. And then they just started losing money hand over fist after that. And I mean, in that situation, it's not really as viable or logical of an idea to start trying to stuff money into politicians' pockets when your revenue is dropping like a rock.
Yeah, there's definitely been some bad decisions over there that have led to, like, we got to clean up the edges and get a little slimmer on our spending here because we're not making good decisions. But I mean, like, first thing I thought about is that crazy California bill and the way that they, tried to pass this legislation about, surveillance on both sides of a transaction. And like, maybe that's what led to hacking team coming into Coinbase and all that stuff. And they would seem to be like the ones ahead of the curve on that. And I was curious, speculation on my point that they're the ones that were helping lobby that legislation to try and basically an attack on Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, naturally, yeah, they're losing a lot of money. They're going to have to, slim up the books. And a political action committee is one of those things where, you got to have a lot of extra money running around to start throwing money in politicians' pockets. And, yeah, it looks like they're not really in that way anymore.
No para. Why did the government stooge stop trying to bribe the government? Hmm.
I'm sure they have their reasons.
Yeah, they need to stop losing money.
Very dense answer. Lots of informative insight. So I guess
yeah, let's take us into this all these technical updates, man. What's been going on?
Well, Lightning Labs now has a mainnet alpha for their desktop app while they're trying to kind of move along and get things ready for shifting over to mobile. And I've seen two bugs so far, although it's really just GUI stuff and nothing in the core of the application. So can't really criticize that much considering it's an alpha at the current time. But they've pretty much smoothed out the user interface where they want it. It's very bare bones and minimum, and I guess I'll get back to that in a second. But they've also released Neutrino, and this is for anybody who watched the special edition with Nikolai Dorier and Pierre Rochard. I have a very big issue with how they've implemented this, in that they're not doing it the proper way, where it's querying a trusted node in terms of what is the longest valid chain, but it's pretty much just grabbing from random nodes and following whatever has the most work. So it's really the worst way that you can implement SPV. Like, it's completely insecure and just blindly trusting the miners. And I really do not like, one of the biggest players involved in developing and pushing the Lightning Network doing something like this, because when this starts taking off, this is going to be putting a lot of users in a very unsafe state that's open to arbitrary changes or attacks by the miners, as opposed to being completely safe if it's simply querying a specific node and following that node's validity. But they've optimized the Neutrino sync so that it actually goes through in the background the second the app opens, so that while you're starting the wallet up and backing up your word seed, it's actually already bootstrapping the Neutrino filters. Although this is where I ran into one of the glitches. The GUI froze at block 312,000, although the app actually was continuing to sync in the background, and I just had to restart it for the GUI to unfreeze and recognize that. So again, being in alpha, that's really not an issue. And then I think as a result of that bug, it triplicated the notification log that syncing was complete. But like again, that's pretty much a completely irrelevant GUI issue. And then as far as the actual user interface, I'm honestly not really that fond of it. And I think that they've gone a little too bare bones in trying to simplify things. Like, the balance is pretty much just entirely in one balance, and instead of differentiating between amounts on Lightning or on chain, it just gives you a percentage of the overall balance that is in the Lightning network. And I think this is one, it's just not intuitive for people to look at something that just displays an amount and then percentages that need to be computed in the user's head. Like, that's not a very friendly or intuitive thing. And honestly, I think really that Lightning is not ready to try to abstract balances like this, and I think it's going to take a lot more work on how things actually function in the back end before that is really an appropriate thing to do. That's not going to create just a bad user experience because of not displaying enough information. And also, I'm really starting to not like the idea of doing that at all, because I don't like the whole concept of just balance in a wallet. Like, I think users need to recognize that you don't just have a balance, you have UTXOs. And they need to be able to think in terms of UTXOs to properly manage that money. And, just shill Wasabi a little bit here. I think that's one of the best things that they've done in terms of the user interface, is they're not hiding that very important piece of information from the users. They're putting it right in front of their face where a user can't kind of get around thinking about that, because that's how the information is displayed to them. And then in terms of the actual payment and receiving, I really don't like how the receive side of things is set up. Like, if you actually look at the wallet, it's pretty much just a balance with a top bar for settings, and then a request and pay button with the transaction log at the very bottom. And pay is capable of recognizing both Lightning invoices as well as an on-chain Bitcoin address, but the request payment only functions to serve a Lightning Network invoice. And you actually have to go up in the top left with a QR icon to get an on-chain address to either deposit into the wallet to open a channel or to receive an on-chain payment. And I just think that's really a bad job of abstracting things in terms of on-chain versus off-chain, because they bundled the paying to things over Lightning and on-chain into one feature. And I just think it's a very confusing and counterintuitive thing to then go and separate the receiving of money on Lightning and on-chain into separate things, and really kind of hide away the receiving of on-chain payments in a place where it's not really obvious or intuitive, that it's there. And so honestly, like the direction they want to take the user experience and user interface, I think still has a lot of work in it to go. But I also, the more I've really sat and thought about it, I don't think I'm fond of even just the direction they want to take the user experience and interface. And I think that it's going to take a while for them to get there. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to cause more problems than it will help, because it's doing the wrong thing in trying to hide things from users instead of display it in a way where they can intuitively understand it.
And you think if you would use that wallet for a while, you wouldn't get used to that way of information displaying?
Well, I would, but I also understand all of the important things there are to understand already. Like, I'm not being led in a direction of failing to understand the important things. I already understand them. But I think if you present this wallet to somebody who doesn't know all these things, like, it's doing a bad thing, because it's hiding the whole concept of UTXOs. And ultimately, that is a very important thing for users to understand when interacting with Bitcoin, in terms of the cost of moving their money, like how that cost is actually worked out, the privacy of their use of things. I mean, it's like, that's not something I think that's responsible to hide from a user. Like, they should be shown it and made aware of it.
So how about this idea? Because Bitcoin and Lightning works differently, and it's possible, in fact, it might be inevitable if we don't increase the block size or something like drastic like that, that the Bitcoin's fees will be, I don't know, $50,000-$100,000 for single transactions. And for that, who are handling that much money, they obviously want to see their UTXOs. So maybe Bitcoin would be that low level stuff that no one's using, but everyone would be on Lightning. And maybe on a Lightning wallet, if you send money to a Lightning wallet, then it wouldn't even do on-chain transactions. It just does the on-chain transactions in the background, and it would say, I'm setting up the Lightning wallet for you, you have to wait X hours or something like that. And actually in the background you are waiting for confirmations, and basically no one would have to ever really leave the Lightning network. Do you think that user experience would be possible or good idea, or what do you think about that?
If you start going into channel factories, maybe, but like, before we get that far, like, I don't think that's a viable thing. And I mean, like, this is one of the reasons why I constantly talk about Xiaomi eCash servers, is like, Lightning is not a magic solution. Like, it's not going to be a retail payments thing that's going to last forever and ever and ever. It's going to be the exact same thing as the main chain. Like, the main chain started off as everything. Your retail payments, your micro payments, like, you had things like Satoshi's Dice spamming the chain all day. And then it's saturated. And the market adjusted in an equilibrium to bring that price up, and slowly things got priced out, and people had to start using it in a way that was different than how they started off using it. And that same thing is going to happen to Lightning. Like, it's just, that's the reality. Like, it'll give us a lot more runway. Like, I think it is definitely something that can function for retail payments and commerce use for the next 5-10 years, but it's not going to stay like that forever. And like, that's something that people need to understand. And like in the long term, like with Lightning, that's even the same kind of thing as a UTXO. Like, people should be aware of and understand the difference between individual channels and how those can be used and how all of that works. Because as things start shifting away to Lightning being more about storage and settlement and moving into other layers on top, like, people need to understand those things, or we're literally just going to replay the same shit show we've had for the last 5 years over the main chain, except with Lightning Network. And that's a result of giving people the wrong ideas and spreading like false expectations.
Yeah, so these abstractions might be too early, but I mean, let's be honest. If we actually want to take over the world with Bitcoin, then we have to do them anyway in the long future. But I agree with you in that these abstractions are too early. All right, I guess we can move on to the next topic. How about that? Shinobi Moon browser.
What browser thing? Oh, that.
Bezos Bitcoin.
Yeah, so a payment processing startup called Moon that I have never actually heard of before is launching a Lightning enabled wallet that can be used with a browser extension they have to pretty much buy things over the Lightning Network on sites like Amazon. And like they're integrating and working on Amazon right now, but plan to kind of spread this out so that it can effectively allow you to pay with Lightning anywhere. And it's pretty much just functioning in the back end as a middleman where you make the Lightning payment. And in the back end, Moon handles moving things over to fiat and actually ensuring that the Amazon merchant or whatever site you're using is paid the appropriate amount of fiat to fulfill the order. And I do think that this is kind of interesting because you have businesses like Purse that kind of built their own like indirect exchange where you're effectively selling Bitcoin for Amazon credits or having people buy things for you to allow people to shop on platforms like Amazon. But this is kind of taking that whole concept and just abstracting it away from a specific business to allow it to really be used anywhere. And I do think that's an interesting thing, but it's definitely a useful thing. Like people like me who have all their money in Bitcoin, like things like this help. Like when I need something, this removes a lot of the hoops I have to jump through to actually pay for it. But I still think like this kind of stuff is it's useful to a small group of people, but it's also like this is too early to really be trying to spur mass adoption in terms of consumer use. Like, yes, you might be able to get in and carve out a niche, getting people like me as a customer for something, but that's a small customer base, really. And it's going to be a small customer base for a while to come, just because most people aren't buying Bitcoin to go shopping online. They're buying it as an investment, as a hedge, as a last resort to safeguard their money because they're living in some place like Venezuela where their currency is hyperinflating like crazy. And it's just that shift over to using it widely for payments, like that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to just be a switch that flips and everybody's using Bitcoin all of a sudden. Like that's going to be a slow, gradual process. And so businesses like this, they need to like understand the market they're jumping into, or like it's not going to be something that lasts forever. Like this kind of thing is you are trying to cater to a small niche of hardcore users, and it's not something that's going to see explosive growth overnight or anytime soon.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, the amount of people holding Bitcoin, is relatively small when we're talking large markets like this. And then the amount of people dealing with Lightning is even smaller. And I mean, yeah, as long as they know that, that's what they're dealing with and that's what they're getting into, at least it will help, people in Lightning help make some purchases on Amazon and get some things they need. I mean, guys that, just ran out of the Shift card. It's like maybe you can start ordering some groceries through Amazon or something now. I mean, it gives an option and it gives a different use for Lightning, just like, Satoshi's Place or, Feeds the Birds, all these little, different little Lightning applications that have been coming out. I mean, this one is one that, it definitely has a use for right now. And, right, it'll be minimal. But, hopefully in the future, like you guys were talking about in the last segment, as far as like one day when we do have channel factories and we have people just coming into Lightning and coming out of Lightning and, that sort of business model, it'll be a lot bigger and maybe these guys will be well positioned for that. But I mean, it sounds interesting and I'm going to take a look at it some deeper for sure. Might be ordering my sodas with some Lightning.
You soda pops. So no part, Janine, what do you think? What do you think about this? You're going to Lightning all the things?
I mean, I don't know. I'm just any stories that are about like, so and so is now accepting Bitcoin. It's like I'm not quite as excited about anything in that regard because most of the time it's not stories about a retailer actually accepting cryptocurrencies. They're just saying, oh, we'll work with this payment processor and they will convert it for us, and it's just not the same thing. So I'm only going to be excited about stories where the retailer is actually accepting cryptocurrencies.
I 100% agree with Jinin, and it really feels these kind of stories. I mean, I don't see it. It has meat in it, but in 2014, how many times did China ban Bitcoin? Later on, you become desensitized to this thing, and over the years, you've seen this happening over and over again, and these companies are failing and think. But I'm not specifically criticizing this thing. I mean, I hope they do their best. It just I've seen this so many times, and it's nothing special. Nothing ever happened. Like the Purs IO was maybe the most successful attempt of doing things regarding this, but I mean, they went Bcash, so that didn't turn out to be very well. Yeah, so yeah, I've seen it once. I've seen it many times, and I hope the best.
Also, from Amazon's perspective, there's a bunch of these processors who are like, oh, if you buy our gift card, then we'll do this on Amazon and whatever. Those kinds of services have been around for a really long time. But from Amazon's perspective, they don't actually have very much of an incentive to keep these partnerships sustained or to enable these partnerships for a long time, because from their perspective, they get, when people buy things on Amazon gets the added bonus of mining your purchasing data. So I would have to look at what kind of data Moon is sharing with Amazon when they're buying stuff for you. I mean, hopefully they're not sharing, or they're sharing as little as possible. I would be surprised if that was the case, but if they're sharing less data than Amazon would normally get, if a customer just went through Amazon directly, I mean, that's a loss for them in terms of their business, which a large part of it is centered around surveillance. And so from their perspective, they have no motive really to make this sustainable, because the number of people, I mean, first of all, the number of people who use Amazon, I think there's people who buy Amazon gift cards, but there's not a huge segment of their shoppers who are doing it through like these kinds of partnerships, especially with cryptocurrencies. So not only is it not exciting because Amazon's obviously not accepting Bitcoin, but also it's not something that's likely to stick around, especially in these years where, there aren't a lot of people using Bitcoin, let alone Lightning for retail.
Yeah, I don't really think it's going to change any of the information Amazon collects except your payment details, because it's like this looks like a browser extension that actually handles things. So you're still like browsing Amazon's site, filling everything out there. The only difference is paying the Lightning invoice through the app and then having them handle the actual fiat payment.
Yeah, I mean that's even worse because that means I don't even get the benefit of privacy. I'm basically telling Amazon that I'm a Bitcoin user, and I definitely I don't like it when I'm forced to disclose that to any company.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's definitely some issues there, but I mean, as far as just giving someone an ability to, yeah, I mean, order groceries, but I mean, for sure, it's all built out on what your different trust models are and what your value proposition is and all this. And I mean, for those people that are in a crunch, they might need to spend it, but for sure, like, I don't like this common practice I've seen where it's all about the payment processing of the crypto or Bitcoin is all about putting it all back in fiat, and it just seems like it's really just putting sell pressure on the asset. So, yeah, that seems to be an underlying issue with a lot of these payment services. But I mean, at least like I'm saying, there probably are some people out there that they may be struggling to find a place to buy some groceries or something like that. And, maybe they already are, heavily affiliated with something like Amazon and grocery services and all that sort of thing. So it all depends, but for sure, I understand your position.
All right, Janine, what's next?
So speaking of actual privacy enhancing things, for anyone who doesn't know, the Samurai Wallet development team have been working on their own CoinJoin implementation for a while now called Whirlpool. And you can find the code for that at github.com/samuraiwallet/whirlpool. And on April 21st, they kind of subtly announced on Twitter that this feature would probably be coming to their wallet soon. And I also saw a tweet from Laurent a few days before that where he said that he had made a transaction on Mainnet using Whirlpool. And if you look under the replies to Samurai Wallet's tweet from about 3 days ago, the account Samurai Dev says that they will be operating multiple pools to accommodate different denominations. And that's because obviously when you're using a CoinJoin, the amounts being mixed aren't hidden. So the best way to engage in a CoinJoin is if all of the amounts being mixed are the same, so that there can't be statistical correlation. And I think the most common mixing amount is still 0.1 Bitcoin, but that would be cool if they had different amounts that you could be mixing it in, because obviously maybe some people might want more, some people might want less than that. So I think it's really great, and I think Samurai Wallet is still the best option when it comes to privacy features on a mobile wallet, and maybe it can even compete against some desktop wallets in default setting. And I think they're the only mobile wallet that I know of that's implemented CoinJoins. Obviously, Wasabi does that, but I don't think any other mobile wallet does that.
Mycelium.
But
They never actually
okay. I want to talk about, share my thoughts, or more like think it's true with you guys, the Whirlpool thing. But before that, there is something how shall I see it? You see, I'm not very pleased how that tweet was formulated. Can you read it?
I don't have it open, but I remember it saying mobile dot coinjoins dot and then let that sink in, I think.
Yes. Mobile CoinJoins. Let that sink in. What do you think about this? It's like someone was saying that, hey, CoinJoins are not possible on mobile or something like that.
Well, it's not that it's not possible. It's that it hasn't been done yet. You know what I mean?
No, it has been done yet, and that was called Mycelium Shufflepuff. And
yeah, but they
also,
never was released and like
even
put
on
into production.
Even on a web wallet, which is even shittier than a mobile wallet, much more constraints, which was blockchain infused shared coin. But anyway, that's beside the point. This is a direct reference for me when I am saying that privacy is hard to do on mobile. And they turn this around and they start talking about CoinJoins. Hey, CoinJoins are not possible. That's no one ever claimed that CoinJoins are not possible on mobile. CoinJoins are the easy part. What's the hard part is to establish your wallet balance without exposing your identity and your addresses to a backend server. Now, this is when I want to talk about Whirlpool here. So what do you guys think? What's their plan with Whirlpool?
It's to build up CoinJoin liquidity.
Wait. Okay, CoinJoin, but why do they implement trustless CoinJoin when they are exposing when they can de-anonymize their clients? I mean, it's so much easier without implementing a trustless CoinJoin.
Well, one, no, Para, because it's a superior protocol, and I mean, two, like they have been completely transparent about their wallet's use of their own application, and again, like they're releasing soon their Dojo backend so that you can drop that on top of your own node and use your own node. And like the reason I would see to do Xiaomi and CoinJoin over a normal one where the server can de-anonymize everything is as users start migrating away from their server and node to their own, that should be a default for everything. Like they should not be able to correlate things for people who are using their own nodes. That should just be a default no matter what.
Okay, look, this is absolutely not superior. You can do much easier, more stable things if you can de-anonymize your users. You don't have to deal with any of the blinding magic thing. But anyway, so okay, everyone who's using Samurai as a light wallet can be de-anonymized by Samurai wallet. Then that assumes they want to do something that makes sure that they won't be able to de-anonymize, right? Because otherwise there wouldn't be need for this mess at all. So what do they want to do? They are looking at, they are building their dojo, which is great. So now, if you not now, but in the future, if you connect your mobile wallet to the dojo, then they will not be able to de-anonymize you, except that they will, because all the other parties are going to use Samurai Light wallet and not the dojo, so that it doesn't matter that you won't be able to de-anonymize you. It's a 5 anonymity set CoinJoins, so that 4 party they can identify, and based like on that they can identify you too. So
you act like
I don't understand.
But no part that is wildly different. Like completely. Being able to see that one output belongs to some separate entity is not tying that all together with all of their addresses. It's not chunking all of their coins together into a single graph. It's just all they can do is know this one output is some guy who's using their own node.
Yeah, that's just not true. Rick, you, Janine, and me are mixing together, and 3 of us are using a mobile wallet, and you are using your own full node. So we are all exposing the links to Samurai server. So what do you think the leftover inputs and outputs are? It's you. It doesn't matter if you are using your full node.
Yes, it does, because all you get is that one transaction, that one input or input. So you don't get everything in the wallet. And again, this is still a valuable thing. Like this is still obscuring things on chain for another party.
But why do you need to do it in a trustless anonymous way when it's not actually trustless, because you can easily de-anonymize in another way, right?
Okay, no, because it's absolutely trustless.
All right.
No, do not say that it is not trustless. You can point out flaws in the privacy, it is absolutely trustless. There is no way to lose money. You are not ever relinquishing control of your coins. So trustless is absolutely an inappropriate way to
Well,
describe
okay,
it.
not inappropriate, because there is a trust of privacy and a trust of who controls the private key, right? So that who controls the private key, that's a basic thing. That's everyone knows that Samurai is not controlling your private key. Now we are talking about the trust of the privacy, and that fits the context.
So, I mean, I've said this before when samurai stuff has come up, especially when Jonas Schnelly was going on his little snit fit. I mean, to me, it looks like they've been pretty clear from the beginning that they focus on-chain privacy and enhancing that. And yes, there can be improvements in terms of like what you are or what their users are exposing to Samurai servers specifically. There are some people's threat models that they like the privacy on the blockchain, or at least not making it harder to identify who they are in the blockchain, is more important than potentially exposing addresses to a company that is, in a relatively safe country that's not trying to kill them. I mean, obviously, it's entirely possible that someone could be colluding with their own government, but that's far less likely than that's a far less concerning issue than, using any other wallet that's not only you're exposed to their company, but you're exposing, more information on the blockchain that you ideally wouldn't. So yeah, there's a bunch of improvements that could be made, and that should all be considered. Like if some people have more extreme threat models, that should be considered. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, because the thing is, I don't even use mobile wallets because I don't use mobile. But at the end of the day, Samurai is the best option at the moment because they are at least trying to implement as many features as possible within the constraints that, there are a number of users who can't run their own node, but they would still like to have on-chain privacy, and maybe they're willing to make the sacrifice of some privacy to Samurai servers. And obviously people should be made aware of that. I don't think they've been very open about the fact that that happens, and they're trying to mitigate it with the node that they're building. So yeah, I mean, that I think, it could be a risk that there are some users who are not using nodes, and maybe that's an issue, but I still think that this is the best attempt, and no one else is willing to do this work. So I'm not going to put too much pressure on them to like be perfect at such an early stage, especially when they are also in alpha.
I mean, I'm just showing you a logical fallacy. So let me explain how Chummy and CoinJoin works. I get an input and I blind an output, and I send the blinded output with the input and an input proof to the server, and then the server blindly signs it if everything checks, and then gives back. And then later on there is the output registration phase. You have to unblind the output and then register the output and then send it back, and then it's signing. And then the question is it complicated? It is. Why is it complicated? Because the server cannot learn the links between the inputs and the output. That's the whole reason of this magic. Otherwise, if the server can learn the link between the inputs and outputs, you don't build this kind of stupidly complicated system, because you can just give a fucking transaction to the server and other people give the transactions to the server, and that's it. The server just combine the transactions and you're done. You have a stable protocol. No one can do anything problem. You see the fallacy here?
Like two things, Nopara. Like you're assuming that there's never going to be a case where everybody or most of the people in a CoinJoin are using their own node. So you're effectively arguing any instance where that would be the case, fuck giving them privacy, because sometimes the privacy will be less. That's ridiculous.
Yes, but that's
and
a,
two,
that's a fair argument, because most of the people are going to use Samurai with node as a mobile wallet. They're not going to buy at the dojo. It's a mobile wallet.
One, Dojo is the software. You're not going to have to buy their hardware node to use it. Two, It's not an unfair argument. It's an actual thing. There are cases where that privacy will not be weakened because of the participants, and giving them weaker privacy is just a dumb thing to do. And three, when the dojo software is released, there is absolutely nothing from stopping somebody like me from running dojo and just allowing anybody out there I know to connect to it. So even people who aren't running their own nodes, we could very well see the user base migrate away from Samurai's node and start using all kinds of disconnected nodes, which fragment all of that private information and get rid of a single entity that can see everything.
So
In which case, it also still makes sense to do a Xiaomi and CoinJoin.
it's unreal. Reality is that 99% of the people are going to use Samurai as a light wallet. It's not gonna. People are not going to put up full nodes on their homes. And anyway, even if they do, so how do you verify that you are mixing with people who have full nodes? You can't. So you just can't build trustless privacy in a way. You see the problem? If not,
no, it's again, I'm not saying prove it, Nopara. It's just that there will be cases where, unbeknownst to everybody, all of the people in the round, or most of them, will be using their own nodes. And to have that situation, which will occur, and give them less privacy is a dumb decision. And again, what I just said with Dojo Nopara, it doesn't matter if somebody is running their own node. When Dojo is released and I put that on my node, all of my friends and family who use Bitcoin are going to connect to my node, not Samurai's. And when they do that, I'm going to be the one seeing all that information, not Samurai. And you can bet your ass that every person who uses Samurai who runs their own node is going to be doing that with all of their friends and family. And it's going to take that one silo of information and it's going to spread it all over the place.
I mean, come on, this is just ridiculous to assume that people are going to roll on their friends and family to their own full nodes, and most of the people are going to use full nodes.
Right now. People do that right now.
Okay, some people do that, but most of the people don't and never will, and that's the issue here. Do you see? If you run a full node, it doesn't matter. You are not anonymous in the CoinJoin because other people are not anonymous. So you are the only one who is not anonymous. It's not hard to understand.
No, like I totally get what you're saying. Like, and I get what the other guys are saying. Like, I like the fact that Samurai is trying to build out privacy for a light client, but I do see what you're saying as far as like this implementation of a CoinJoin. It could be, somehow, allowing some information, some data to leak out to where people could eventually trace back your identity. I mean, like the idea of different trust models varies, and a lot of people, that getting that 100% privacy is always very difficult. And I know that, there's challenges in all this, but, I think it's great that, Nopara, you're doing an awesome job with Wasabi and, the Xiaomi and eCash way to do things. It seems like that's the best way to do a CoinJoin implementation is it's on the main chain because, I mean, for me, I get what you're saying about it. It's just like it sounds a little too overly complex where it's like with Lightning Network, you already do get an added layer of privacy on that. And I'm sure that's going to keep getting improved with, Schnorr signatures on the main chain. And then, as far as we get like channel factories and all sorts of, more people in the Lightning Network, it'll be even harder to trace that. So I understand what you're saying. It does sort of like implement some, it adds some other points where a person could lose some privacy there. And, but it is like I said,
Rick, okay, look, I know you are trying to do the mediator role here, but people are fucking risking their lives on our software. Seriously, it's literally death and life. Who's going to jail for what? Like at one point you have to stop doing this. Like not you, Rick, but
No, I get it. Like, there's definitely people that their life is on the line with their privacy and their money, and that's something where for sure I would recommend this. I mean, this is like these guys are saying it's in alpha, and they're
And where that risk exists is on chain connecting things. Like, unless you're sitting here saying Samurai is going to give all of their private information to Iran, everything is obscured on chain. And again, Nopar, you are completely ignoring multiple ways this can go. Do you know why most people don't hook up their node or their wallet to a friend's node? Because network address translation, because all of the network configuration and firewall complexity, which makes it a gigantic fucking pain in the ass. Dojo makes it as simple as scanning a QR code and handling all of it over Tor hidden service, which removes all of the things that stop people who would want to do that from doing it. It takes away all of the pain in the ass.
I really think it is not ethical to mislead the digest audience. Seriously.
all right. Like, I think we can just say that for right now it's alpha. There's nothing there about it's going to bring you the sort of level of privacy that Wasabi brings you. And let's in the interest of time, we are getting into 20 minutes on this subject, and we still have to go back over the lurking person. Let's talk about what's going on with Wasabi.
No. This is not a case of anybody misleading anyone, Nopara. You are being completely absolutist, and you just implied that we are misrepresenting things, when all I am doing is pointing out different ways that things can play out and different tools and opportunities to take a single silo of information and distribute it around so it is not a single point of failure or a threat or a thing any single entity can use to de-anonymize everything.
I don't only imply that you are misrepresenting things. I am implying that I've been misrepresenting things in the digest because I kept silent all the time, and now the fucking sock puppet is keep trolling me, and I just realized that a lot of things are making sense, and it's like, man, this is a fucking outright scam and dishonest people. I don't care anymore. It's crazy, and you keep telling things, but the simple truth is that they can de-anonymize every single user at any time, and that's no one ever talks about. And you are never Jonas Snelly for talking about that.
They couldn't. They have never once claimed that they cannot de-anonymize or see people's balances. Once.
Look at the answers on their Jonas Snelly's tweet. They are trying to hide the fact as it's just in every way.
No, they're not.
Yes.
Like, no, Para, look, I had a conversation with Jonas Schnelly. Jonas Schnelly does not know what the fuck he's talking about, and he's also hiding things. So, what? A lot of...
I mean, it's not Trump and Hillary. Oh, he's bad too. Doesn't matter. The problem is that look at the answers, what they are answering under
I don't, because I read those threads to Nopara, and they answered them. First of all, you're looking at a thread. Is that the thread that's from a few months ago? Because Jonas Schnelly has brought this up 2 times now at least, and they already answered him way back in November. The reason they're being pissed off this second time is because they've already answered his allegation. It's something that everyone knows at this point. Like, he's bringing it up just to, stir the pot because he wants to distract from his own issues that no one else knows about. So, like... I'm sorry, but the idea that they're misleading anyone is not true. They're responding in an angry way because they have already addressed it multiple times, and he does not care.
They have not made a single false claim or misrepresentation of things regarding where their software is privacy or private and where it's not.
All right. Well, we've driven this argument 23 minutes in, and I mean, for sure, there's definitely the statements out there that say this isn't 100% private, that it's going through their servers, and I get Nopar's frustration with the fact that that isn't more prevalent in their discussions, I suppose, and like legitimately, I understand these are all interesting things that are coming up, but all these technologies, they have these different problems and issues, and they're all working on fixing those. And there's very few and far between projects where you don't really run into these issues. And I mean, I'm sorry, but Nopar is like one of the guys on the panel here where it's like, this guy's implemented an amazing wallet here that is providing privacy to where it is saving people's lives. And so, Nopar, why don't you tell us what amazing updates you pushed just recently with Wasabi?
Yeah, we added hardware wallet support.
All right. So that's some news that everybody's been waiting on. It's incredible that you pumped that out in just like a week's time. And I know that has been some frustrating discussions too, as far as working with different hardware wallet companies and all the way this stuff works. And yeah, so great job on that, man. Was there some other features there that we needed to run about? Like what exactly is this lurking mode?
It hides your sensitive information if you want to take a screenshot or someone is looking at your computer.
It's lurking wife mode.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to be.
Lurking waifu.
Lurking waifu. I was just looking at your comment, your question there, asking people about it on Twitter, and it looks like you've got over 82 replies. And I've been looking through it, and yeah, it does look like there's a large sentiment of people that do think that it should be changed. I don't know though. That's
these kind of things are so insignificant for everything else. I was so surprised that people feel so strongly about how feature is called. I mean, it's objectively funny. So, but
Hear, hear.
whatever. So I put up a poll and then I let them decide that what they want. Do they want to keep the name or rename?
Yeah, I think that'll be like an interesting little side discussion for sure, and ZK Snacks about what to do here, because yeah, sometimes it's a little jokingly put something out there, but in today's world, people take that seriously, and then it's just like, oh goodness, like you weren't expecting the backlash of the market. But yeah, wasn't there something else I was looking at on that new update that you pushed out? Let me see.
Currently, 56% of people support leaving it the hell alone based on the negative vote structure. Leave it the hell alone.
All right. Yeah. I mean, we'll see.
It's a 3-day poll. A lot of things can happen. I already got a pull request renaming the lurking wife mode to do you remember, guys? Instant stealth mode.
No, that's stupid.
The whole discussion is stupid, but just make you don't want to piss off your customers. All right. So yeah, that was a long discussion there on a lot of stuff. But yeah, it looks like we about round everything off here. You want to go into final thoughts?
My only final thought is that supposedly there's going to be one or two UN people going to visit Assange in prison tomorrow. So, I mean, there's already been, I mean, I've been collecting responses from a bunch of international journalists, human rights, etc., civil rights organizations around the world, including, you know, India, Spanish-speaking world, obviously Europe and the US and the UK. And I mean, it doesn't appear at this for the past couple of years that the UK gives a fuck what the UN says, but I think at this point, even if they don't care about, you know, decisions that they make, it's still valuable for someone to actually go in there and then report back, you know, how he's doing and what the state of his situation is.
Yeah, let's get some support out there, some more people to, you know, stand up for real journalism. All right. My final thought is a message that came through the Blockstream satellite that looks like maybe Hodlnaut is sending out a message. He said, "Dear community, I just want to say I am very thankful for all the support. It has repeatedly hit me right in the feline feels and made me very proud to be part of this community. It has been one of the realest things I've ever experienced. Thank you, Hodlnaut." And yeah, that was brought to us by _ Dr. Go on Twitter. And yeah, it seems like maybe he's out there still. Maybe he'll show back up one day. I don't know. We're still with you, man.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of final thoughted out.
Yeah, I think I already said more than I should have, so
No, it's fine, man. It's interesting discussion for sure. I know the chat loved it, and I'm sure some people listening on the replays will be, yeah, loving it too.
Alrighty. So I guess until next week, adios, everybody.
Later, everyone.
bye.